Picture this. It's 6:27 a.m. in Tehran. People are asleep. The city is quiet. And then, the first missile hits. Then a second. Then a third. Within 1 hour, the entire world changed. February 28, 2026. The United States and Israel launched a simultaneous, coordinated assault on the Islamic Republic of Iran. This wasn't a warning shot. This wasn't a skirmish. This was a full-scale war. And 8 days in, it shows absolutely no signs of stopping. Today, we're going to walk you through everything. How we got here, what happened, day by day, who's winning, and, most importantly, where this is all heading. This is 8 days that shocked the world. To understand what's happening right now, we need to go back, way back. 1979, the Islamic Revolution. For decades, the US and Iran were close allies. America supported Iran's Shah, its monarch. But in 1979, everything changed. The Islamic Revolution swept the Shah from power. Ayatollah Khamenei took control. And in the chaos that followed, Iranian students stormed the US embassy in Tehran and held 52 American diplomats hostage for 444 days. That wound never fully healed. From that moment forward, the United States and Iran have been enemies, locked in a cold conflict that just turned very, very hot. Iran versus Israel. Why do they hate each other? Iran's leadership has repeatedly called for Israel to be wiped off the map. Israel has repeatedly warned that a nuclear-armed Iran is an existential threat to its existence. In 2024, they exchanged direct missile strikes for the first time in history. The gloves were coming off. June 2025, the 12-day war. In June 2025, Israel launched large-scale strikes on Iran's nuclear facilities. The United States joined in, striking 3 nuclear sites. After 12 days, a ceasefire was reached. Iran publicly stated its nuclear program had been halted. But behind the scenes, tensions were quietly building towards something much bigger. January 2026, the crackdown. Fast forward to January 2026. Iran's economy was in freefall. The currency had collapsed. Millions were struggling to survive. Millions of Iranians took to the streets in the largest protests since the 1979 revolution. The Iranian government's response was brutal. Security forces killed thousands of protesters. The world watched in horror. President Trump posted on Truth Social, "Keep protesting. Help is on the way." That wasn't just a tweet, that was a signal. February 2026. Talks, buildup, and breakdown. In February, the US and Iran sat down for indirect nuclear negotiations in Geneva, with Oman acting as mediator. At the same time, the United States was quietly executing its largest military buildup in the Middle East since the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, B-2 stealth bombers, all moving into position. The US demanded Iran stop all nuclear enrichment, completely. Iran refused. On February 26th, the talks collapsed. 2 days later, the bombs started falling. Operation Epic Fury began. US warships in the Persian Gulf fired waves of Tomahawk cruise missiles. US Air Force B-2 stealth bombers, the most advanced aircraft ever built, crossed into Iranian airspace. The Israeli Air Force launched over 200 fighter jets simultaneously. What did they target? The strategy was clear and ruthless. Strike the head first. The very first target was the compound known as Leadership House, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei's residence in Tehran. Then came the IRGC headquarters, missile launch sites, air defense radar systems, nuclear-related facilities. Cities hit simultaneously. Tehran, Isfahan, Qom, Karaj, Kermanshah. In a single night, Iran's military infrastructure began to collapse. Khamenei is killed. By morning, the news that stunned the world broke. Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for 35 years, was dead. Killed in the opening Israeli airstrike on his compound. His daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchild, all killed in the same strike. Iran's defense minister, killed. IRGC commander, killed. Chief of Staff, killed. Supreme National Security Council Secretary, killed. In a single night, Iran's entire top military and political leadership had been wiped out. Trump addresses the nation. At 2:30 a.m. Washington time, President Trump released an 8-minute video statement. He said Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, its support for terrorist proxies, and its killing of protesters had left the U.S. with no choice. Iran fires back, same day. Iran did not wait. Within hours, ballistic missiles were launched in Israel, Tel Aviv, Beit Shemesh, Ramat Gan. One woman was killed by shrapnel, 40 buildings were damaged. Simultaneously, Iran unleashed drones and missiles at U.S. military bases across the entire Gulf region: Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Jordan, Iraq, Saudi Arabia. And then came the announcement that sent oil markets into freefall. The Strait of Hormuz closed. 20% of the world's oil supply passes through that narrow waterway. Oil prices surged instantly. The global economy shuddered. Day 1 casualty summary. Iran, hundreds killed in strikes, including Supreme Leader. A girls' school in Minab struck, over 160 children killed. Israel, 1 killed, dozens injured. U.S. Military bases across the Gulf targeted March 1st. Day 2. The strikes didn't stop overnight. They intensified. By day 2, U.S. Central Command confirmed it had struck nearly 2,000 targets in Iran in less than 48 hours. The IRIB, Iran's state broadcaster, headquarters, destroyed. Iran's parliament building, targeted. The IRGC's Malek Ashtar building in Tehran, completely leveled, confirmed by video footage. 100,000 people flee Tehran. The United Nations confirmed that in the first 2 days alone, over 100,000 people had fled Tehran. Highways were jammed for miles, gas stations ran dry, stores shuttered their windows, a city of millions emptying out. March 2nd, Hezbollah enters the war. On day 3, the conflict expanded beyond Iran's borders. Hezbollah, the Iran-backed militant group in Lebanon, officially entered the war, firing rockets into northern Israel in retaliation for Khamenei's killing. Israel responded with over 250 strikes in Lebanon, killing Hezbollah's intelligence chief in Beirut. The war now had a second front. Gulf states under fire. Iran escalated its retaliation across the Gulf. Bahrain, the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters, hit. Bahrain's airport, targeted by drone. Residential buildings, struck. 7 attack drones deliberately fired at civilian neighborhoods, according to CENTCOM. Qatar, 2 ballistic missiles struck the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest U.S. military installation in the Middle East. Qatar Civil Aviation suspended all flights. Qatar Airways grounded its entire fleet. Schools moved to remote learning. Public Ramadan gatherings suspended. UAE, 109 drones and 9 ballistic missiles intercepted in a single day. 3 people killed, Pakistani, Nepali, and Bangladeshi nationals. 78 others wounded. Dubai International Airport attacked multiple times by drones. Saudi Arabia. Iranian attacks targeted Riyadh and the eastern province, home to the kingdom's major oil fields. 16 drones heading toward the Sheba oil field intercepted. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh hit by 2 Iranian drones. Fire broke out. Kuwait. Multiple drone and missile attacks. At least 3 people killed. U.S. Embassy operations suspended. Jordan. 49 drones and ballistic missiles intercepted by Jordanian air defenses. Iraq. 67 drone and missile attacks on U.S. bases. U.S. and Israeli forces also struck the Jerf al-Sakr base in southern Iraq, targeting Iran-backed militia Kataib Hezbollah. Day 2 to 3 casualty update. Iran, death toll rising past 1,000. Lebanon, 123 killed in Israeli strikes, 683 wounded. Kuwait, 3 killed. UAE, 3 killed, 78 wounded. U.S., 6 service members killed. March 3rd, day 4. By day 4, analysts noticed something significant. Iran's rate of ballistic missile launches was declining sharply. The US confirmed the drop. Iran's ballistic missile attacks had fallen by 90% compared to day 1. Drone attacks, down 83%. Two explanations emerged. Iran's missile stockpiles were being depleted, or Iran was deliberately conserving weapons for a longer war. Iran confirmed it had launched over 500 ballistic missiles and nearly 2,000 drones since February 28th, 40% aimed at Israel, 60% at U.S. targets across the region. The U.S. Senate, pushback falls short. Back in Washington, a group of senators attempted to invoke the War Powers Act, which requires congressional approval for military action lasting more than 60 days. The vote failed. The Senate backed Trump's campaign. March 4th, day 5. By now, U.S. Central Command confirmed it had struck 4,000 targets across Iran in just the first 4 days. The Air Wars Research Group published a striking report. The U.S.-Israeli campaign had hit significantly more targets per day than any military campaign in recent decades, surpassing even the pace of strikes in Gaza, Iraq, and Syria. Trump makes his demand. Addressing reporters, Trump said, "Iran has no navy, no air force, no air detection, no radar. Just about everything has been knocked out." Then came the headline-grabbing ultimatum. Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender. He said there would be no deal, no ceasefire, no negotiations until Iran completely capitulated. He went further, saying he wanted to personally have a role in selecting Iran's next leader. He called Khamenei's son Mojtaba, the leading succession candidate, an unacceptable choice. Iran's response. Iran's foreign minister was unequivocal. No ceasefire, no new talks. Iran is prepared for a U.S. ground invasion. Ali Larijani, secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, warned that Iranian forces were waiting for a potential U.S. ground invasion
and threatened to kill and capture thousands of American troops. The two sides were further apart than ever. The cost of war. The Center for Strategic and International Studies estimated the first 100 hours of Operation Epic Fury cost approximately $3.7 billion, roughly $891 million per day. Most of that, $3.5 billion, had not been budgeted for. Weapons manufacturers, Trump said, would need to quadruple production to sustain the campaign. March 5th, day 6. The war jumped to a new geography entirely. Britain's RAF base at Akrotiri, Cyprus, sovereign UK territory and a NATO ally, was struck by an Iranian drone. For the first time, the war had touched European soil. Britain scrambled Royal Air Force jets to Bahrain and began defensive operations. Iran's deputy foreign minister issued a chilling warning that European nations would become legitimate targets if they joined the U.S.-Israeli campaign. Digital infrastructure hit. In an unusual escalation, Iran struck Amazon Web Services facilities in the UAE and Bahrain. Cloud services and internet infrastructure across the Gulf disrupted. The oil crisis deepens. The Strait of Hormuz remained under threat. Qatar, the world's largest exporter of liquefied natural gas, had completely halted production. Oil prices hit their highest level since September 2023. Stock markets wobbled across Asia, Europe, and the US. Major airlines suspended Gulf routes. Russia, meanwhile, announced a significant increase in demand for its energy products, as buyers scrambled for alternatives. Russian intelligence involvement. U.S. officials, speaking anonymously, revealed that Russia was providing Iran with intelligence on U.S. military positions. President Putin called Iran's President Pezeshkian to offer condolences and express solidarity. The geopolitical fault lines of this war were becoming impossible to ignore. March 6th, day 7. Israel's military claimed it had achieved near-complete air superiority over Iran,
announcing it had conducted 2,500 strikes and destroyed 80% of Iran's air defense systems. In a historic moment, an Israeli stealth fighter shot down an Iranian Yak-130 fighter jet over Tehran, the first time an Israeli aircraft had downed a manned fighter since 1985. U.S. submarine sinks Iranian warship off the coast of Sri Lanka. A U.S. submarine fired a torpedo and sank the Iris Dina, an Iranian frigate. 87 crew members were killed. 32 were rescued by Sri Lanka's Navy. Iran's Navy had been practically dismantled. U.S. Central Command confirmed 43 Iranian warships destroyed since the war began. Iran's president apologizes to Gulf states. In a remarkable televised address, Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian apologized to neighboring Gulf nations, promising Iran would stop attacking them unless those countries' territories were used to strike Iran. Hours later, fresh blasts were heard in Bahrain, Qatar, and the UAE. 20,000 Americans evacuate the Middle East. The U.S. State Department reported that approximately 20,000 Americans had left the Middle East since the war began, with the government arranging charter flights for those still trying to get out. March 7th to 8th, 2026, today, 8 days in. Here is the full picture of where things stand. The numbers. Iran. At least 1,332 civilians killed. Over 6,000 wounded. Over 6,668 civilian units targeted, including hospitals, schools, residential areas, the Tehran Grand Bazaar, and the historic Golistan Palace complex. Over 3,000 total targets struck by U.S. forces alone. 43 Iranian warships destroyed. Supreme Leader, Defense Minister, IRGC Commander, Army Chief, all killed. Navy practically eliminated. 80% of air defenses destroyed, per Israeli military claims. Israel. 11 people killed. Dozens wounded. Multiple cities struck. Tel Aviv, Beit Shemesh, Ramat Gan. Air raid sirens active across the country for the 7th straight day. United States. 6 service members killed. A dignified transfer ceremony held at Dover Air Force Base. Trump and Vice President Vance attended. Lebanon. 123 killed in Israeli strikes, 683 wounded. 95,000 people displaced since the war began. Gulf states. UAE, 3 killed, 78 wounded. Kuwait, 3 killed, U.S. Embassy suspended operations. Qatar, Al Udeid Air Base struck twice. Qatar Airways fully grounded. Saudi Arabia, multiple attacks intercepted, oil fields threatened. Total displaced across the region, UN estimates approximately 330,000 people have been displaced. Iran's power vacuum. With Khamenei dead, Iran's constitution triggered the formation of an interim leadership council, consisting of President Pezeshkian, Chief Justice Mohseni Ejei, and Ayatollah Arafi. An election for a new supreme leader is scheduled for sometime in 2026. Khamenei's son Mojtaba is considered the frontrunner, but Trump has explicitly called him unacceptable and said the U.S. intends to play a role in selecting the next leader. That statement alone has drawn widespread international condemnation. International reaction. United Nations called the strikes a squandering of diplomacy and warned the conflict risks spiraling out of control. European Union declared the strikes an illegal war of choice. Russia, expressing solidarity with Iran, reportedly sharing U.S. military intelligence with Tehran. China, evacuating citizens from Iran, playing the long game. Spain, refused to allow U.S. use of its bases. Trump threatened to cut off all trade with Spain. Ukraine, offered to send experts to Gulf nations to help defend against Iranian drones. IAEA stated it had no indication that nuclear installations had been hit or damaged. Now, the question everyone is asking, where does this go from here? Let's walk through 3 realistic scenarios. Scenario 1, Iran surrenders or negotiates. Trump is demanding unconditional surrender. Iran's military capability has been severely degraded. The Navy is gone. The Air Force is crippled. The entire top leadership was killed in the first 24 hours. Is there a scenario where a new Iranian leadership, or a faction within the IRGC, decides the only rational move is to negotiate? It's possible. Iran's president has already made overtures to Gulf states. The missile rate has dropped dramatically. But Iran's foreign minister has flatly refused, and the IRGC still has fighters, and Iran still has drones. Likelihood? Low, but not impossible. Scenario 2. A long, grinding war. The White House itself suggested the campaign could last 4 to 6 weeks. Iran has pivoted to a strategy of conservation, using drones rather than expensive ballistic missiles. Its proxy network in Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and Lebanon is still active. Hezbollah is already fighting in Lebanon. Iran-backed militias in Iraq continue striking U.S. bases. If Iran adopts a prolonged guerrilla-style strategy, this conflict could drag on for months, with no clean ending in sight. Likelihood? High. Scenario 3. Regional or global escalation. This is the scenario that keeps analysts awake at night. Russia is already providing Iran with intelligence. China is watching its strategic partner take devastating hits. Iran has explicitly threatened European nations. NATO's territory in Cyprus has already been struck. If any of these actors escalate their involvement, or if Iran attempts a ground-level asymmetric campaign against U.S. forces, the conflict could expand in ways that are extremely difficult to contain. The risk of a World War III scenario remains low, but it is not zero. Likelihood: low, but the consequences would be catastrophic. The economic reality. Regardless of how the military campaign ends, the economic damage is already severe. The Strait of Hormuz remains under threat. Qatar's gas production has halted. Oil prices are at multi-year highs. Gulf airline routes are suspended. Cloud infrastructure has been attacked. Economists warn that if this conflict extends beyond a few weeks, a global recession becomes a genuine possibility, with the heaviest impact falling on developing nations already struggling with inflation and debt. The nuclear question. What was this really about? Here's the uncomfortable truth that analysts keep raising. The official justification for the war was Iran's nuclear program. But the IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog, stated it had no indication that nuclear installations were actually hit or damaged in the strikes. And remember, Trump himself said in June 2025 that Iran's nuclear program had already been obliterated in the 12-day war. So if the nuclear threat was already neutralized, what is this really about? Most independent analysts have reached the same conclusion. This war is about regime change. Whether that regime change succeeds, and what Iran looks like on the other side, may be the defining geopolitical question of our time. 8 days, 1,332 Iranians killed, 6 American soldiers dead, 11 Israelis killed, over 330,000 people displaced, a supreme leader assassinated, a navy destroyed, oil markets in shock, the global economy on edge, and the missiles are still flying. This is not just a conflict between the US, Israel, and Iran. This is a war about the future of the Middle East, about nuclear weapons, about who controls the world's oil supply, about whether regime change can be imposed by force, and what comes after if it is. The world is watching, and history is being written, right now, in real time. If you want to stay informed as this conflict develops, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Tomorrow, we'll be back with Day 9 and Day 10 coverage, plus a deeper look at what a post-war Iran might actually look like, and what this means for the United States at home. Drop a comment below. Do you think Trump's decision to go to war with Iran was the right call, or a historic mistake? I want to hear what you think. See you tomorrow.